Welcome to the webinar focused on improving outcomes for young adults in the justice system. We're thrilled that you are able to join us this afternoon and have an exciting lineup prepared. I'm Emily Morgan, Director of Content Development for the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and I'll be joined by Bob Costello, Assistant Commissioner for Training and Organizational Development at the New York City Department of Probation, and we'll be speaking with you today about innovations and effective approaches to better support young adults 16 through 24 who are involved in the criminal justice system. Just a quick note before we begin about the Council of State Governments Justice Center. We're a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. We work with state policymakers across all three branches of government and focus on improving public safety and strengthening communities. So I wanted to first start by discussing, I guess I thought it would be helpful to start by reviewing the current state of brain science and developmental research, and also go into a little more detail on some of the Council of State Government Justice Center's work in this area that serves as a useful backdrop for the practical applications that Bob will touch upon a little bit later today. So why focus on this population? Well, data shows that young adults drive a disproportionately large share of criminal justice activity. They represent a disproportionately high percentage of arrests, particularly for violent crimes, and they are the most likely age group to reoffend. And so any effort to, again, improve public safety, make more efficient use of resources, and target kind of the highest need, highest risk individuals really should include some sort of strategy focused on this population of young adults that are in the criminal justice system. Recent scientific research has also clearly demonstrated that young adulthood is a distinct period of development. So a significant growth and development and change occurs into a person's mid-20s. So young adults are more impulsive, less able to control emotions, less likely to consider the future consequences of their actions than older adults, and at the same time, they're more vulnerable to peer pressure, more likely to engage in risky behaviors than younger youth. Young adults also have distinct needs from youth and older adults. Young adults' immaturity and susceptibility to peer influences makes them even more prone to engaging in criminal thinking and antisocial tendencies, which are often the primary causes of delinquent and criminal behavior. With regard to education and employment, oftentimes young adults are overage and undercredited, so traditional education systems are not set up to adequately meet their needs. Oftentimes young adults involved in the criminal justice system lack some of the necessary skills and have little or no job experiences, so it's more difficult for them to find a job in those cases, not to mention that it's extremely difficult for any young adult to find a job right now. And there are certain collateral consequences also associated with a criminal record, as many of you are familiar. In terms of behavioral health, a significant proportion of individuals in the juvenile criminal justice systems have mental health disorders, substance use disorders, and co-occurring disorders. Young adults are particularly affected because certain conditions emerge during young adulthood. Substance use peaks during early adulthood, both for youth involved in the justice system and those who are not. Young adults are also going through a period of transition, so many will be expected to be self-sufficient upon release, despite potentially never having lived on their own, not knowing how to find housing, or having the necessary skills to live independently. And this is also a time when family relationships or caring adults are really important to help young adults navigate this transition, and oftentimes they don't have these support systems in place. This is also a tricky group to serve because neither the juvenile justice nor the criminal justice system is exclusively responsible for providing supervision and services. So available resources and orientation of the systems and available staffing and services overall differ between the juvenile and adult systems as well as from state to state. So it just further complicates this landscape in terms of how to effectively support young adults. But this enhanced understanding of young adults' development and their needs has spurred a wave of reforms to better support young adults in the justice system. There are state-level reforms related to youthful offender policies to protect young adults from the consequences of an adult criminal conviction. Several states have established specialized facilities or units specifically targeting and focused on young adults. And a number of states have or are considering raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction. And then there's a lot of innovation happening at the local level. So we've seen specialized courts, specialized probation caseloads, some specialized programming, and even some diversion opportunities really specifically targeting this population of young adults with the recognition that they are a distinct population, that getting it right for this population is really important, not only in terms of recidivism numbers and overall outcomes, but also resource allocation and just putting young people back on a pathway to success. So as political momentum has built for young adult justice reforms, policymakers and system leaders have been wrestling with a general lack of research to inform supervision and service strategies. So despite wanting to do something about this population, they haven't necessarily known what to do because there is a pretty significant lack of research on what works for this population specifically. So we thought it would be helpful to sort of at least review what we know so far. So 2 years ago, the Justice Center released an issue brief focused on young adults in the justice system that took a first key step in summarizing the available research. We talked about education, employment, sort of some of those needs that I described earlier, and what we know about young adults' needs in those areas and what kind of effective programming and supports are necessary to address those needs. But there was sort of a surface level understanding, and we recognized that there was a need for a more comprehensive effort to determine what other research could be leveraged to inform supervision and services for young adults in the justice system. So to get at that issue, and as a follow-up to our issue brief, in February of 2017, the Justice Center convened researchers across multiple fields and policymakers and practitioners from states that had been advancing young adult reforms. And we held this meeting in conjunction with the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, who has been doing a lot of work in the area of young adult justice. But the goal of this meeting, in terms of bringing all of these folks together, representing different disciplines and different vantage points on this issue, was to determine what could be taken from existing research across these different disciplines and applied to the justice context. So what from child welfare could be applied, what from education or employment. Second was to identify areas in which additional research would be helpful. And then the third was to better understand what the field needs to effectively translate this research into policy and practice. So it's well and good to know what the research says, but then how do you actually apply it? So the convening, and all of this was focused on supervision and services. So you may have heard a lot of work focused on raising the age or certain structural changes, but the focus of this meeting was really around how do we tailor supervision and service strategies specifically for this young adult population. And the convening confirmed that while research in this area is still growing, a clear consensus exists for what programs and policies have proven ineffective, and an emerging body of knowledge suggests that certain strategies actually do work, and that there's this gap in our knowledge base that could be filled by additional research. So what we chose to focus on was what policies and programs have proven ineffective. So at the bare minimum, let's not be doing things that create additional harm or unnecessary harm or perpetuating problematic situations. And let's refocus our efforts on what we know kind of does work to help better support this group of young people. So this past September, the Justice Center released a list of do's and don'ts to guide policy and practice that kind of talks about what strategies should underpin any effort to reduce recidivism and improve outcomes for young adults. And this report draws on guidance from the Harvard convening in September, and again, provides sort of a do's and don'ts approach to what to help guide state leaders and local leaders as well. And many of the strategies are consistent with what we described in the earlier issue brief, but it provides a little bit more practical application and an at-a-glance perspective. So there are 5 key takeaways from the do's and don'ts publication that I can go into a little bit more detail about right now, and I think it'll be helpful for you to hear from Bob in a few minutes about how the program in New York City is actually applying some of these do's and don'ts, or do's, to help support young adults. So the first key takeaway was around using validated screening and assessment tools to guide supervision decisions. This focuses mainly on using a validated tool, making sure that it's used to identify and divert young adults with a low risk of reoffending from system involvement whenever possible, and focus supervision and services on those highest risk, highest need young adults. Something that came through in our meeting was the importance of supplementing the risk assessment results with additional information, given that you may not get the full picture when you're talking to a young adult and assessing them. So we recommend adding a special interview protocol to help gather additional information about their transition to adulthood. For example, family and support networks, education and career goals, just again to get a more holistic understanding of what's going on with that young person. And because young adults are sort of going through a period of rapid change and development, it's important to reassess them every 6 months or more frequently than you may an older adult. The key takeaway, too, was around funding and providing research-based programs and treatment for young adults, something that was a big topic of discussion during our convening and subsequent discussions was around integrating a coordinated system of wraparound supports. So certainly addressing antisocial behaviors and providing young adults with cognitive behavioral programs that address those behaviors and criminal thinking, but also making sure that those other needs are being addressed through wraparound services. So with a particular attention to mental health and substance use treatment, career pathways approach to make sure that they are prepared with the skills and potentially credentials and education to be successful in the workplace upon reentry. The third strategy was possibly the biggest area of focus when we had these had our meeting and had subsequent conversations was the importance of sustained connections to pro-social peers and adults to strengthen engagement. So in many cases, folks said that even more important or equally important to the content of the program was the people who are delivering the program. And having young people feel like they have somebody who cares about them, that they have a mentor or a support network, and that those relationships are critical to their success because they're going through such a difficult and stressful period of transition, that having somebody to, like a coach, mentor, somebody to talk with and weigh decisions was essential to their success. And this focused mainly on adult connections, but it's equally as important in terms of pro-social peer influences to make sure that they're, again, sort of making the right decisions, putting themselves on a pathway to success. And to help foster those connections, it's important that people working with young adults receive the necessary training to, again, foster those connections. The fourth takeaway focuses on holding young adults responsible for their behavior while accounting for their ongoing growth and development. So in many cases, programs working with this population recognize that young adults are not necessarily always ready to engage, and that it may take them multiple tries to end up fully participating in the program or being successful, and that sort of quote-unquote failure is part of the process, that anyone who has been a teenager or has teenagers who have worked with young adults know that it may take more than one opportunity for them to recognize the value and be successful in participating in certain programs. Also, this speaks to responses to supervision violations that want to make sure that young adults are accountable for their behavior, but utilizing a graduated system of responses so that the most severe penalty doesn't necessarily happen after one violation, but that it's, continuum of responses is really important for this age group in particular, not to mention sort of the general population. And then the fifth takeaway focuses on collaboration across service systems. So again, this sort of speaks to the juvenile justice system. Can't do this alone. Young adults are oftentimes involved in multiple systems, and so it's all the more important for those systems, whether it be education, labor, behavioral health, child welfare in some cases, that those systems are talking to one another and making sure that young adults aren't aging out of certain systems at the same time, that they have some sort of safety net, and that there aren't additional penalties or collateral consequences that continue to impact a young person while they're trying to get back on their feet. The meeting also underscored the importance of collecting robust data on young adults under system supervision, including detailed recidivism data that's disaggregated by age and risk level and other key variables to sort of evaluate the implementation of some of these programs and make sure that sort of tailored responses to young adults actually translate into improved outcomes. And you can assess what strategies are working, what aren't, and really help to target resources and focus efforts on those that have the greatest return on investment. So that was a really quick overview of sort of the existing state of research in this area, some of the work that the Justice Center has done around young adult justice. And now I will turn it over to Bob Costello from New York City Probation, who will help sort of contextualize this and provide a real-world application of what some of these strategies look like in practice. with that,
Emily. Thanks. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you today about our approach for dealing with 16 to 24-year-olds who are under supervision in the city of New York. That approach we've labeled ACE, or Anyone Can Excel. So I'll just, let me go over some numbers really quick. They largely echo what Emily was saying, but I'll just sort of go through these specific to New York City. So, hold on. Sorry, I was missing the little arrow there. So the Department of Probation provides services for about 55,000 adults and juveniles annually through intake investigations and supervision. In any given year, we supervise just under 30,000 adults and a little under 3,000 juveniles. So the young adults, and in New York still today, adult probation starts at the age of 16. We're changing it this year. We're getting it to 18 slowly over time. But for the work we're doing today, our adult population starts at the age of 16. So as you'll see on this slide, on the left side, about 38% of our clients are between the ages of 16 and 24, about 38%. They account for 56% of our total rearrests. Additionally, that 38% accounts for more than 63% of our shooting incidents. And when we look at shooting incidents, we include clients who shoot people and clients who are shot by other people, because both of these are outcomes that we'd like to avoid. So 63.5% of those shooting incidents between January 1st and August 31st in 2015 was for this population. And finally, just globally in the city, about half of the violent felony arrests involve 16 to 25-year-olds. So this is a group of people who are in need of services. They're screaming for help and attention. They're impulsive. They're difficult to deal with. These are all things that you guys know. So let me tell you a little bit about our approach. And I want to be clear. I'm not speaking about this because New York City has arrived, that we are suddenly the gold standard and know everything about this population. We are fellow travelers on this journey trying to figure this out. We have days that are better than others. We have all of the same issues that everybody else do, getting staff on board, crisis, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So naturally, my slides are going to look like there's very little struggle, but the reality is when you put this into practice, there are problems, and I'll try to be honest about that when we talk about it. So when I talk about it. So here's the goal. We want long-term behavior change, especially around violence, because it's the one problem behavior that you don't walk away from or grow out of. You know, we know that young people can age out of criminal behavior, but we have to do our best to limit the consequences of that behavior. So we're trying to give young people improved conflict resolution skills, connection to supportive role models, swift responses to increase accountability, and the responses are to wanted behavior as well as unwanted behavior. And we want to increase or start connections to the community. So we have a three-stage model. And I just want to say, in my opinion, having a model matters more than the model. That is, I think you could try to exactly match ours, or you could make significant changes, but if you don't have a model and don't have an attempt for everyone to be operating within the same sort of basic principles, it's really difficult, A, just to have consistency, but also to measure what's going on. Because being research-informed, being evidence-based, it means following the data, but it also means creating more data. And so we are constantly in the business of adding to the bodies of knowledge that exist around the supervision of people who are involved with the justice system. So this three-stage model Stage one is the assessment and engagement. This is the getting to know you part. So there's an age-appropriate validated risk assessment instrument that we use. We use the YLS for the people who are under the age of 18 and the LSIR for the people who are 18 and up. All of them go through this stage. Even the low-risk folks who we then sort of divert from any intense supervision, everybody goes through this stage. Because in addition to the sort of standard criminogenic risk needs, we're looking at evaluating behavioral health issues, education issues, employment issues, and always trying to strike the balance of not over-servicing. But in many ways, being in this age group, in some ways, it trumps risk level. As you saw on the previous slides, these folks are getting into trouble. And so we're looking to identify the high-risk people, but we're also looking to make resources available when appropriate to the other folks. And so we assigned the caseloads based on risk. That is, high risk have certain POs, the moderate have different, and the low-risk people are seen administratively or only for some stabilization. Now, this is one of the areas in which we struggle, right? That's great on paper, but when the numbers don't match, and I've got a PO who's got 4 people because there's only 4 high-risk people there, then they're getting some moderates, and we're mixing them. So if human resources and funding and all of those things weren't an issue, we'd be completely true to this, but we do our best to separate by caseload, and it doesn't always work. But we do have a philosophy that all of our staff have drilled into them, which is probation is a one-size-fits-one business. This is not one-size-fits-all. Everybody's unique and different, and it's critical that the officers are identifying who the person is across the desk from them. So we have an individual achievement plan for every one of our clients. This is active engagement between the officer, the client, and their circle of care. These are the people in their lives who have an impact on them. We actually, since I first did this, we've changed the term to circle of influence because the individual achievement plan frequently involves people who we don't think of as being positive, but who we know impact people's lives and that we need to be helping to keep an eye on and to track a little bit. And so the officer shares the results of the risk assessment. They identify the problem areas. There's a negotiation where the client and the officer decide where we're going to start, what the highest risk areas are, et cetera, and they get together on how they're going to begin. As you might imagine, that is a nuanced discussion that has to happen. The devil's in the details. We have some people who are absolutely superb at it and some folks who sometimes struggle with what that negotiation looks like. And I'm willing to bet you would in your jurisdictions as well. We have a team supervision model, which just means that every client has an assigned PO, but that PO has a partner. And so the client will know who the partner is. So if they show up on a day where the officer's out, when we do home visits as teams, et cetera, they know a second person. A big part of stage one is building trust, building a sense of connection. And the language I always use with officers is trying to appear different than every other adult they've dealt with. There's great reason for them to distrust people involved in the system, particularly those with badges and guns. And so we need to be working hard without decreasing our authority to start building some trust and a sense of a relationship with a young person. The officer is the primary change agent. We may, from time to time, refer to services, but if you're in ACE, the person helping you change your behavior is the officer, and they've been specifically trained in how to do that. Also, in stage one is the start of the anti-violence messaging. We have a number of initiatives here, which I don't really have time to go into. One I'll mention in a few minutes, but there's a bunch of things that we do both through discussions, videos, and other things that help people wrap their head around alternatives to violence and to better conflict resolution. Stage two, this is where we do our cognitive behavioral interventions. There is individual and group cognitive behavioral intervention. So we have instruments, we have tools that we provide for our officers. So one is called the CARI Guides. There's an organization called the CARI Group where you can buy these cognitive behavioral things that address a number of areas. There's another one called BITS, which are brief intervention tools. And I'm not working for them. I'm not trying to market them, go whatever, but find something with some data behind it. And we actually have the officers, they're the ones who deliver these. And we've trained our officers in facilitating groups, and we've gotten a group, a cognitive behavioral group curriculum that we go through with our clients that helps them identify problems in their thinking and behavior, their decision making, allows them to practice, get feedback, and again, it's critical to us that the officers are the ones who are facilitating these groups. There's a great deal of action planning around the IAP. Every time a client comes in, their individual action plan is open. How are we doing on this goal? Did you meet this action step? Do we need to change this? There's a great video called Voices from Within. This is one of our anti-violent things. We use it both individually and group. There's a group of lifers from Sing Sing who've made a video about what it's like to be there and what they'd like to say to their previous selves, et cetera. And the nice thing for us is most of them come from the neighborhoods that our clients come from. And so they sort of identify a great deal with them and can sort of see themselves in their shoes. And again, I don't work for the people who made the video, but they turned on a camera and a microphone and they left these inmates in the room alone to say whatever they wanted. And so it's moving and it's passionate and it's sad and it prompts a discussion, right? None of these sort of things ever change people's lives, no matter how impactful they are in the moment, but they can soften people for a discussion that happens afterwards, and so that's how we try to use it. We try to assess where people are in the stages of change. We have somebody who's in pre-contemplation. I'm hoping people know what this stuff's about. If somebody's in pre-contemplation on their substance abuse, we don't say, okay, use all you want, but we also don't make referrals to 3 separate treatment agencies, setting them up for failure. So we try to meet with them where they are. We work with officers a great deal to have them able to understand how you move somebody from one stage to the next. We address thinking and decision-making and conflict resolution and use a lot of peer stuff through the groups for them to help each other, see each other as potential resources for each other. And then stage 3, this is competency building. So we partner with an organization called the Credible Messenger Justice Center. Emily had spoken about this as a concept a little earlier. There's an organization that's actually several organizations working together, but you can Google it, there's a place called the Credible Messenger Justice Center, and what we're doing is we're connecting young people to credible messengers, people from their neighborhoods, many of whom are formerly justice involved, people who they see as being credible, and not just introducing them as a mentor to take them out on Thursday nights. Our mentors deliver a cognitive behavioral curriculum. They run groups. They've been trained in restorative practices to be able to handle misbehavior. They're literally providing the intervention as credible messengers. I know that happens in a lot of places. In New York, I think the noteworthy thing is we're a partner. There's an active government partnership between a local university, the folks who are the credible messengers, and us as a government agency. So a great many of our mentors come through a program called Arches. We have programs, Justice Community, Justice Scholars. I'm not going to go through all of these things other than to say we have another thing called Youth Wrap. We have the Summer Youth Employment Program. We have a menu of options that our young people, once they've been stabilized through the cognitive behavioral piece, which is usually at least 9 months, maybe a year, they're connected with more community-based scaffolding. And so, like Youth Wrap, which is the Youth Weekend Restoration Assistance Program, which started after Superstorm Sandy, On Saturday, our clients go out on work crews, and they clean up parks, and they work in soup kitchens, and they do other things with supervision, but they're paid, and it's a way for them to get money. The younger ones who are in school, it's a nice way for them to get money on the weekend, and the older ones, even who have jobs, if they don't have jobs on Saturday, they can be part of youth rep. We have our summer youth employment program, which is a 6-week program where they get paid. There is our Young Adult Success Corps, which is an AmeriCorps program. It's 10 months. It's a living wage, and they get connected to either a city agency or a nonprofit, and they work there full-time and get paid a fairly decent wage. This program is the one where we frequently, at the end of the 10 months, get an email from the partner agency saying, we'd like to offer this person a full-time job. They've worked out that well. And so we, one of my many hats here is I supervise the Director of Workforce Development. So those emails, we're high-fiving and cheering around here. Even if it's one person at a time, we're connecting them to a meaningful career path, and it makes a huge, huge impact. And the last is, you know, there's a bunch of community-based organizations that we can connect people through. So I got one more slide, and then we'll take some questions. I'll do this quickly. We try to use, we're not great at it yet. We're a pretty big agency. We move slowly, but we try to use technology and social media to foster engagement and monitor behavior. So we do a lot of texting clients to remind them about appointments, and there's a variety of ways that we can electronically check in, and we equip our officers with technology that they can use in the field to complete their paperwork and do their check-ins. There's an enhanced administrative hearing and an acceleration of the violation process when need be. We try to avoid violations at all costs, but we're interested in swift responses. We use community-based mentoring, ongoing specialized staff training in adolescent brain development, in positive youth development, in restorative practices, in motivational interviewing, in group facilitation, in cognitive behavioral interventions. And so of our 1,000 employees in this department, not everybody fits this training, not everybody wants this training, and so it's work on our part to make sure that we're identifying the right staff. Hopefully they're self-identifying, and we're getting the right people in place who want to do this. We've got a specialized unit of behavioral health consultants, clinical advisors who help us identify mental health and substance abuse. And we typically use specialized officers for the pre-sentence investigations and for community progression, which is the low-risk supervision, so that they're getting, these young people are getting a similar approach even when it's a lighter or shorter-term touch. So as a presenter, I hate the fact that I just did 22 minutes without any interaction, so I'm going to pause there, and we're going to see you know, what questions they are. Emily and I will try to field them. So I'll turn it back over.
Great, and thank you so much for that, Bob and Emily, and thank you for all of those who have sent questions in already and waited patiently for those questions to be answered, as well as for those who will send in questions, and we hope that you continue to do that, and we will try to get through as many as possible in the time we have remaining. So one question that came up is, in terms of finding jurisdictions, what have jurisdictions done to find resources specifically for youth that are aging out of foster care and have also had juvenile justice system involvement? Is there anything specifically targeting that crossover youth population as they move through this age range?
So I can take a stab at first. So yeah, we know that there are a number of crossover youth that are dually involved in the juvenile justice system and child welfare system, and that those two systems have been working to try to improve collaboration. Many states have explored expanding the upper age of foster care through age 21 to help kind of limit the sort of drop-off of young people who are involved in the system, and that sort of leaving them without any sort of supports in place. I know there are a couple of publications, one by Georgetown, and I'll have to recall a couple others that have talked about how to improve this collaboration and what this looks like. But I think, you know, on a practical standpoint, it's ensuring that the jurisdictions are communicating, that the probation officer, you know, any sort of case plans that are developed for a young person as they're transitioning out of the juvenile or justice system are in coordination, seeing how appointments can be more easily facilitated, and just thinking through how to strengthen that partnership. I'm not sure, Bob, if you have any more concrete examples of what that looks like, but you know, certainly, obviously depends on the age of the individual too.
Yeah, I don't have anything.
Thank you. And Bob, this question is more geared towards you, but are there timeline targets in the stages, and how long does it normally take clients to move through those stages? And is there an assessment used to measure the stages of change?
So no specific assessment to measure the stages of change other than the standard supervision of officers, case reviews, et cetera. And so we have timelines that are strict, and those timelines are based on mandates that exist and should exist. So certain things have to happen within 30 days, right? So we can't wait 6 months to have an individual plan, right? So the first stage, stage 1 is 30 days, and should be, because the plan can change, but it should at least be in place. After that, it's one size fits one. So there's some standard things that we sort of expect. It's rare for me for somebody at moderate or high risk in phase 2, they would need to, I would think, be 9 to 12 months typically, 12 being sort of the standard. And then after that, how much time does it take somebody to get meaningfully connected, and when might they step down, and when do they reassess as low? So we look at, it's 30 days, 30 business days, and then 12 months, and then after that it's a lot more amorphous. But even the 12 months, it's the responsivity principle, and it's the one size fits one.
Great, thank you. And we've received as well a couple questions about eligibility. And so is this program mandatory or voluntary for the participants? And beyond just age range and risk, what are the eligibility assessments for young adults in the system? For example, could a 16 to 20-year-old convicted of a sexual offense also be able to go through this programming?
So there's only 2 things that disqualify someone. It's not an elective, it's mandatory. So the 2 things that make you not eligible for this particular approach, one is having been convicted of a sex offense, and the other is having had a previous adult probation experience. And so, it was a program designed for people who were new to the justice system, but also we ran into a lot of problems with people who had previously been involved in the justice system. So one of my favorite examples was we had a guy who took a plea, and he sort of slipped through the cracks administratively and got to an ACE PO, and the PO's explaining about the groups on Wednesday night and about the cognitive behavioral homework that he would be asked to do and the connections, et cetera. And the guy said, no, I've done this before. I'll come in monthly and show you my paycheck. That's what I agreed to. And so he had a very different expectation of being on probation. We also got funding so that it was supposed to be for folks who were newly into the system. So it's just sex offenders, and if you had a previous adult experience, the folks who have had previous adult experiences, we try to provide them with similar services when appropriate, but that's the only thing. Other than that, if you're under 25, this is what you get.
Great, thank you very much. And this next question is for the both of you. Are you aware of any specialized services based on gender, so services for female or male specifically, or is this sort of the same programming is used for both males and females?
So I'll go first, Emily, quickly. For us, Globally, it's the same, but the cognitive behavioral group, there are times where, for a variety of reasons, we separate those and make it, there's a male group and a female group. The curriculum doesn't change. Now, there are specialized sub-services that impact people, but it tends to be based on an identified issue as opposed to globally, if you are male, you have one set of services, and female, you have another set of services.
Yeah, and I think in our experience and folks we've talked with, in some cases it's specialized programming and gender-responsive programming, but sometimes it's also training for staff delivering that programming and how they can be mindful of the different sort of types of individuals who are participating and how to be responsive to their needs, because it may not always be possible to do breakout groups for women, for men, for a number of different subgroups, but to make sure that that's incorporated in the training for the folks delivering that programming so they can be responsive as appropriate.
Thank you. This next question is going to be for both of you as well. And so it's, what sort of roadblocks were there to identifying and working with this as a specific target population, both that Bob you saw in New York and that Emily you've seen nationwide? Is it generally legislative or structural roadblocks? Are there individuals or offices that are generally opposed to viewing this group as a targeted group specifically separate from juveniles or adults? Or have you seen that a majority of people recognize the brain development and that this is a unique group?
So for us, look, barrier number one to dealing with this group is who they are. This is a difficult group to work with. So barrier number one is just being with a significant number of people under the age of 25 who are justice involved, who are having a variety of issues that they're wrestling with. That's the number one hurdle in working with this population, is just getting to the point where you can effectively work with this population. None of the other, so there's barriers in New York. These 16-year-olds are identified as adults, et cetera, and we tend to, there's a imaginary number in our head where we give up on people's ability to change and get better, and now they just need to be locked up. So in whatever corners of the world that mindset exists, I guess it winds up being a bit of a barrier, not hugely for us. And then, there's just the reality of staff who do not have the same philosophical approach as the administration does, and navigating the combination of pressure and support required to get them to come on board a little bit, or have some serious career decision-making, soul-searching to sort of deal with that, because not everybody's going to love the approach. Separating them by age, I don't think is a huge barrier. The idea that providing services, having some understanding of their inability to make good decisions, of their impulsivity, and all of the implications, I think, is sometimes more the sort of personal struggle that goes on.
Yeah, I'd echo sort of everything that Bob said. I think, this population can be a difficult one to work with, and so folks, it takes a certain type of personality to persist and work with this population, and so that's a challenge. Certainly the fact that young adults straddle both the juvenile and adult criminal justice systems is a challenge, and there are structural barriers and policies about, what individual can be in which system, and oftentimes the supports and services differ in those systems. So, an 18-year-old who's in the juvenile system may have access to different types of things than an 18-year-old in the adult system. Also the reorienting of staff around providing support and mentorship for young adults is sort of a culture shift that takes place over time. Certainly we've seen in Connecticut, they developed a unit specifically for young adults in one of their correctional facilities, and some of that work is expanding, but it's, you know, a process to provide training and get folks on board. I think there's a general understanding of the developmental research, but it's, you know, another thing to actually put that into practice and figure out how you're going to operationalize that.
Great, thank you both. It was also mentioned during the presentation that some states are looking at increasing the age of juvenile jurisdiction above 18. Could you identify which states those are?
Sure, so no one's done it yet, but Connecticut had a proposal, Vermont had a proposal. I think those are the only two at the moment, but you know, even though they weren't actually passed, like the legislation didn't pass, it just sort of signals growing awareness among policymakers for this issue and sort of a, you know, the appetite to take on this kind of policy change is expanding as well.
And I know that Bob mentioned a specific, you know, risk assessment that they use for youth under the age of 17, but is there a, you know, best practice or validated risk or need assessment that has been validated with this age range specifically that you would recommend?
So I could probably go down the hall and grab our researcher and have her answer the question from a New York City standpoint. Here is as a non-scientist, I think that one of the critical things in adopting any sort of risk need assessment is the transparency and the engagement of staff. If you currently don't use one or don't use one with this population, when you introduce it, officers are going to think that you're trying to replace them with a computer, that their professional judgment no longer matters, or if they're used to assessments but you've just picked one for this group, they're going to become convinced that you picked a horrible one because it doesn't measure this or it doesn't measure that. So we've gone through all of that with every iteration of risk need assessments here, and so the critical thing for us is nothing makes it go away, but we have teams of people who, from officer to supervisor to branch chief, across the agency, working with adults and working with juveniles, who look at, evaluate, and then make recommendations on which one we choose. And we're not going to do that every month, so we have a couple now, but we're using 2 risk needs assessments that our line staff had significant input into us choosing. They all have benefits and, sorry, it jumped out of my head, whatever the opposite of a benefit is, downfalls, right? But the process by which they're chosen, as long as you're limiting the choices to ones that have some validation, I think carries a lot of weight in the realm of organizational change.
And Emily, any thoughts on, you know, what exists nationally in terms of validated tools, or would you just echo what Bob had?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a number of validated tools, you know, available. I think rather than like endorsing a particular tool, it's really important, A, that it's certainly validated and that it's being used consistently across, you know, the system, that results are being updated regularly to account for transitions and changes in development and progress. and that the results are actually used to do something, to inform decision-making and case planning and things like that. Oftentimes we hear about jurisdictions that have been administering risk and needs assessments pretty well, but actually the results just sit on a shelf and nothing really happens with them. And so it's important to not just go through the process and the motion of doing the assessment, but really looking at what the results say and how does that inform what services and supervision a young person should be receiving.
Thank you very much. And I think time for one last question, and this is for you, Bob. What is the retention rate in your program, and what strategies do you utilize to keep youth engaged?
Okay, so part two help was when you asked me about the retention rate, I was going to ask if you meant for staff or for our clients. So so I don't have a number, but I'll tell you this. You have to work pretty hard to get thrown out of this. You know, the way you get out of ACE is by being incarcerated. It's not, we're going to stop doing this and send you to general supervision. So there needs to be some significant rearrest or a violation that causes us enough concern. We don't toss people on technical violations or any of that sort of stuff. So the retention rate is high, and we're too early in our process for me to tell any sort of numbers, but the preliminary numbers are that the people who are in ACE have a much lower recidivism rate than a similar cohort. So the researchers down the hall will decide when it can be released and when it's, you know, appropriate, but our initial numbers are we're having fewer problems. And I would say one of the reasons is because we're responding to the little things. When a failure to report is dealt with swiftly and consistently, it tends not to escalate quite as much. So so I'm sorry that I don't have a number in front of me, but the folks stay until they can't be on probation anymore, and our job is to be responsive to what they're presenting with, and the preliminary numbers look pretty good. I also want to say, sort of jumping back to the last question, Emily answered that better than I did. If you are not going to use your risk need assessment to inform your practice, and you absolutely should, by the way, but if you're not going to, I think you shouldn't even bother with the assessment, because one of the major damages is you're not treating people in the way that's going to impact their behavior. You're over-treating low risk, under-treating high risk, and you're not putting your resources in the right place. But one of the other major issues is you're losing all credibility with staff. Here, I want you to do this thing. You have to be trained in this. I need you to be an expert. We're going to check and make sure that you do it, and then we're not going to change the way that we work in any way. And so it's damaging on so many levels. So Emily was absolutely correct. The people who put this on the shelf cause damage to clients and also to staff morale. These have to inform the way that you supervise people.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you again to both Emily and Bob for your presentations today and for answering all of these questions. We are unfortunately out of time, so thank you all very much for joining our webinar today. If you would like more information about what's going on with this population and what's coming up with both CSG and the National Reentry Resource Center, please sign up for our newsletter. And if you have any additional burning questions for us that were addressed today, please feel free to reach out to myself or Emily. And thank you all again for joining this call, and have a great day.